Welcome to History Pub. The Cottage Grove Genealogical Society and the Downtown Cottage Grove sponsor the History Pub. But in Cottage Grove we have a group of historic organizations that all work together. We collaborate, and those are the Cottage Grove Historical Museum, the Cottage Grove Genealogical Society, the Oregon Aviation Society, the Cottage Grove Historical Society, the Cottage Grove Library, Bohemian Mining Museum, and Singing Creek.
A lot of this information was discovered through our volumes at the Sentinel. As I was looking through the archives to find information on the old K&D history, I stumbled upon a picture that just caught my curiosity. And if it wasn't for the University of Oregon archive or newspapers, a lot of this would be quite hidden as well. We do have a lot of information here, so hopefully we can digest it all. And if I'm going too fast, maybe somebody can raise their hand and I'll slow down a little bit. I tend to be hyperverbal sometimes. So I'm going to read off the script here that I have, but I'll kind of bounce in and out of that too, if I find something juicy to talk about. Okay, so welcome to Hand Crank Twirler. This is Byron Houck's story. Byron Houck is an amazing legend that lived in Cottage Grove for a short time. He wasn't born here. He was born in Prosper, Minnesota, back in August 28, 1891. His family moved from Prosper to Portland, Oregon, where he's best remembered growing up in the sandlots and sandfields out there pitching baseball games. Let's see. There you go. You can see that and soak it all in. I know it's like being there. He's a prominent athlete there in Portland. He went to Washington High School, where his earliest mentions in the newspaper came around 1909. Something like this, okay? Some of those early newspaper mentions were found in the archive, and his participation was through a debate class in high school. So that's where we first learned about Byron. What was described as an interesting and timely and prompted debate. It was resolved that fraternities should be prohibited in schools, which Byron spoke against. Although this was an impromptu debate, Houck won much praise for his argument, but lost due to not having very much experience. But some of his next mentions, he was elected president of the Athletic Association, and he was also the best man at his sister Blanche's wedding in 1909. And so this is the notice here for his place there at his sister's wedding. In 1910, Houck assisted the Washington team to winning 2 high school championships, which is pretty cool. He's a very exciting sports person to watch. He was a member of what was called the Owl Club. This was a co-ed club in Washington, and the purpose of that was to advertise the merits of the U of O and to attract students in general. And so the club's congregation worked, its membership grew. When he was admitted, it grew from 8 to 28 just that year. We accepted 28 students. And so even with a sore arm, the very first year that he was pitching with the University of Oregon, he was bidding for a place on the varsity team. His very first game was a shutout against Whitman College, where he only allowed 2 hits in 6 innings. So in January 1911, Byron, regarded as one of the most promising pitchers at the U of O, was suffering with a sore arm, but newspaper publications published his picture for the very first time. And he was a freshman pitcher with a very poetic name, an excellent performer. And he earned his place in the varsity squad. And then he eventually transferred over to the Gresham Giants, where he played for a little bit. There was a fellow that he was friends with named Johnny Toshler. And it was Johnny who picked up on how good this kid Houck was, and he was then recruited by the Spokane Indians so that he could come and play there. Tasha wrote a glowing letter about him, and he was accepted into the team. He initially declined trying to sign a deal with the Indians, stating that his interest really was in finishing school. He wanted to complete the university, but was only persuaded a month later to sign. And with that, we also understand that the Spokane Indians were scouts for the Philadelphia Athletics, who were a Major League Baseball team at the time. A very exciting one, too. They had won a pennant in 1910, and they were searching for new blood. Mac, let me make sure this is a picture of him. No, but pass it up. You get the idea. Mac is the longest running serving manager in all of baseball history, arguably one of the greatest professional sports players and managers of all time, leading the A's into countless wins, managed over 7,700 games in total. Incredible person there. So the Indians signed George Houck as well. George had a brother, and this plays out a little bit later too. George Houck's brother pitched for the University of Michigan. So it was there where he started his baseball career, and it was there where he met a Cottage Grove personality named S.L. McInerney, and they were college chums for a little while. And so he became, S.L. McInerney became a prominent businessman here in Cottage Grove a little bit later. But George Houck, Byron's brother, also played. But towards the end of 2011, product of Portland. Every schoolboy above kindergarten age in town knew his name and his exploits because he was a star pitcher of Washington High School. He won the 2 interscholastic championships, and he had a powerful right arm. By the time 1911 hit, he was recruited into the Philadelphia Athletics. So his stardom was growing very, very rapidly. Just 2 months before that, he was pitching with the U of O, and now all of a sudden he's pitching in the major leagues. Yeah, that fast. And so there were a lot of exciting players at the time. There was a person named Napoleon LaJoie, and he played with a team called the Cleveland Indians, and he was a great hitter. Byron's worst enemy. He also pitched against Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb also played around that time, and his batting average at that year was 366. Ty Cobb. So he'd always find a way to hit off of Byron, but Byron couldn't hit it if it was standing still. Unfortunately, his batting average was just .065, less than 100. So at the end of the 1912 season, although his batting average was the lowest, he was promoted and asked to come back the next year by Connie Mack. His salary was also increased. He said, "I guess I make good all right. Connie Mack, the greatest leader in the world, offered me a better contract for 1913, which certainly shows that he thinks I did not fail as a major." He ended the season with an 8-8 game win-loss. And he had a sore arm the entire year. Poor guy, couldn't catch a break. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, there you go, look at that. Who's one of the Cottage Grove residents who had a baseball card assigned to them? Byron Houck. He's one of the only ones. And with his earnings, he invested $475 on a property in Portland over in Mount Tabor, where he held on to it for a little while. He was featured in this baseball card here. The Fatima Cigarette Company was offering baseball cards that year. Houck was one of the stars. He also married his sweetheart, Kitty Barnard. They were married in September 13, and this is a really interesting parallel here because Kitty was a sister of a vaudeville star named Sophie Barnard. And Sophie Barnard married another vaudeville star at the time named Lou Anger. And Lou Anger grew in the ranks to become a huge star there in the vaudeville field. And in 1913, he gets his picture taken again, and he's put up there by the Morning Oregonian, star athlete, prominent figure. So in 1913, the Philadelphia A's won the pennant. That means that they won their league. They won their league, but they were itching to try to win the series against the New York Giants. And Byron Houck's high school principal was interviewed by the Morning Oregonian and asked, who do you think's going to win? And he thought the Giants would. He was wrong. It would be the Athletics that year. They were chasing the pennant against the Giants. They were able to gain the pennant and win the series. However, there was a problem. Byron played through the regular season with a record 14-6, better than the year before, Big 8. However, he walked 122 batters that year. 122 in only 175 innings. So he was walking way too many batters. And his reputation began to grow as a very wild pitcher. Yeah, so he was benched for the World Series. He played for the pennant, but he did not play in the World Series that year, which may have hurt him. At the beginning of 1914, Byron sold the house in Mount Tabor in Portland to his mom, Ida. And something happened. He was suddenly released by the Philadelphia Athletics, which crushed him because he was told to go to the minor leagues, the Baltimore club, which was also part of the Philadelphia Athletics franchise, but he refused to go. He stated that if he could not pitch in the big leagues, he would not pitch at all anymore. He quit baseball for a minute. He didn't want to be seen as a cast-off, understanding that staging a comeback is very, very difficult in the big league. So he signed a deal with a new league called Federal League and a team called the Brooklyn Tip-Tops. The team, the Brooklyn Tip-Tops, saw a lot of potential in Byron, thinking that his wildness can be cured. Just, making sure that he's out there throwing and not hurting himself, and also being careful with the drinks as well. That could have been another factor in why he was so wild. He wintered in Portland that year. 1914, unfortunately, came around where he was really upset about what had happened there with the Philadelphia Athletics, and he was interviewed by the Morning Oregonian November 14th, and he exposed a lot of corruption that was happening in baseball, mainly over tip-offs to batters that were made by managers, giving the offense directions and how the ball will be pitched to them by shouting out coded phrases like, bust this one for a curve, or the manager would shout, that a boy, and they'd know that a fastball was coming in. So Byron revealed that they knew every ball that the Giants pitchers were throwing to them. He was revealing way too much here, claiming that they also won the 1910 and 1911 pennants outright too, and strategically using players as pawns in trading wars by intentionally allowing some of them to fail by, for instance, telling them to go back to third base instead of scoring the run, and then they lose the game, and then you're fired. That's what he was doing out there. And it was sort of a strategy for him too, because then you can let go of that player and then just recruit another young person to come in. And so he also Byron revealed that manufacturers were coming around and slipping each of the players' shirts and hats and other stuff for the privilege of using their names. And for Connie Mack, that took the heart out of the team by releasing young pitchers and replacing them with all new ones. And so these sort of revelations were unheard of at the time, especially during that era in baseball. Hardly ever ran in national newspapers, and so as a consequence, Houck was blacklisted. He was an almost unbeatable pitcher when he was doing very well, but he walked almost every single batter until forced to resign during some of his lower points with the A's. Houck was asked to step down. It was either play the majors or quit. Instead, he negotiated a deal with the tip-tops, and there he went. Here's another little thing, too. And so he was also saying that players were doctoring balls. Okay? So that's also another thing, that they were stuffing the ball with memory boards that were placed in their nets. But then he also revealed that they didn't even need the memory boards. They could just use their fingernail and scuff them, too. And so, with that said, some pitchers could still get away with it now, because as the ball's in play and it hits, ground ball hits the field, you can still use that ball until the umpire decides to get rid of it. So some pitchers do know how to still use a scuff ball even today. And spitballs were not really still considered illegal during the time too, which was a very difficult thing for some hitters that weren't able to hit those balls. Where are we here? Slide 12. Yes. Okay, so now we're at the part here where in 1915, he takes off to Coos Bay with his wife and figuring out what he's going to do to avoid a lawsuit. He was dropped by the Brooklyn Federals too. The Tip-Top decided to let him go as well. He was just running his mouth over here in Oregon, and the Brook Feds figured it out. He's just talking way too much. They let him go as well. To avoid the lawsuit, they called in his contract. So for 50% of it, he took on that money and he was let go. And so he became a free agent after that time. Alrighty? Yeah, we'll keep it there. So we said players have been making big money the last couple of years, but I don't think they will make this pay very much longer. So I am reconciled to quitting the Diamond. Give me some good job outside the game and I'll be happy. Houck admitted. Do anything instead of play baseball. But he returned to baseball anyway, this time on the roster for the Pacific Coast League with the Portland Beavers in March 1916 with a sore arm still. He was out the first 3 weeks of spring training. He was known as the broken arm pitcher. Yeah, poor Byron. And he showed good moments during his time, including another baseball card here made by Zenith Company. So he was out here playing for the Portland Beavers again in 1916. Not the majors, but he was still playing ball. And he could still throw spitballs with the Pacific Coast League. Signing the contract in 1917, he reported to Honolulu with a ukulele. At the same time, his wife Kitty was praised for singing in a quartet out in Portland. She was working for a NAP company there. So Kitty Houck was the sister of Kitty Houck Barnard. Was the sister of Sophie Barnard Anger, okay? A vaudeville star. And we talked about her a little bit with Louis Anger as her husband. They were a comedy duo. They both became really big stars in 1917. Sophie was headlining with a song called Poor Butterfly at the fabled New York Hippodrome. Huge place out there. All the silent stars played there. And her husband Lou was thrust into the business end of the entertainment field by producer Joseph Schenck, and then managed the careers of vaudeville stars, including L. St. John, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, and Buster Keaton. Okay? So here's a really famous story from the silent film era. Lou Anger now is working for Joseph Schenck. And Joseph Schenck tells him, we got to get the biggest star out there. Who's the biggest star but Fatty Arbuckle in comedy? Go to New Jersey, get him. And so there goes Lou Anger on a mission to try to poach Fatty Arbuckle. And he shows up at his movie set. It's a short film that he's making there at the time. And during the downtime in production, he walks straight towards Fatty Arbuckle, missing security somehow, and he offers him $5,000 per week working for Joseph Schenck. Plus a silver ghost Rolls Royce, just to sweeten the deal. Done deal. When can I get to Hollywood? He was gone. He was done with New Jersey, 1917, and so he moved out to Long Beach. And out there, he started the Comic Film Corporation. And Lou Anger had a friend in vaudeville, Buster Keaton, that he'd known ever since he was a very, very small young performer. And there we have Keaton with Lou Anger here on the other end, if you can see him. And in the middle is Charlie Chaplin, too. So yeah, they were all together, working together. Chaplin and Keaton never made a silent film together, but they did make a soundie much, much later called Limelight. Let's go to the next one. So on his arrival, Arbuckle put Keaton in the scene and was immediately offered $40 a week to work for the corporation. Anger serving as a manager for both Keaton and Arbuckle at 20% commission. And when most agents made 10, Keaton would go on to become a fast rising star under Arbuckle's direction in 1917. There's a lot of fascinating side stories here. I'll tell one real quick. So he convinces, Lou Anger is like a Svengali type guru for both of them, telling them to buy and sell whatever they want. And Buster Keaton goes to Lou Anger, telling him there's a friend who has this gravel pit and they want to sell and I want to buy. And Lou Anger is like, a gravel pit? You're making movies. You're fine with the movies. Stay with the movies. So he goes over to Fatty Arbuckle. He's like, you want in on this? And he gets in the middle and says, no, we're not doing this gravel pit. You're doing the movies, invest in that. You'll double your money, triple, 10 times your money. So they let go of the gravel pit and somebody else buys it. The people who buy it end up striking oil and they lose a bunch of money. They could have become millionaires if it wasn't for that darn little Anger. So in 1918, are we still there? Yeah. All right, 1918, after Houck stint with the Beavers, he was suddenly drafted into the St. Louis Browns, another major league team. Finally, he's back in the majors. But the amount offered was not as much more than that of Portland, and the monthly wage was offered rather than a lump sum. It was first refused by Houck, but the contract was signed a month later, and he was told to report to Shreveport. It was his final year in the majors. He saw an opportunity to pitch against Connie Mack's Philadelphia Athletics that year. In his return to Shibe Park, Houck gave up 3 runs to the Mack men in the very first inning. Yeah, it was a real tough loss there for Byron. 8-5 was the final score. Those 3 runs that he gave up in the first inning being the ones that got him lost, unfortunately. He also faced the Boston Red Sox in August during Babe Ruth's penultimate year. Ruth played left field, first base, and pitched in one of the 4 games that season, missing only one, the game where Houck pitched in relief. He never faced Ruth, but gave up only 1 hit at Fenway Park that year. And Houck's career began to dramatically change in 1919. When in February, it was announced that the St. Louis Browns sold Houck to the Vernon Tigers of Los Angeles. Houck pitched several good games for the Browns, and after the season closed in September, went to the shipyards in Washington or in Tacoma, staying near the coast because he could make more money. But as fate would have it, Lou Anger's brother-in-law, okay, Houck, was convinced to sign a deal with the Vernon Tigers. And Louis Anger had just previously convinced his buddy Fatty Arbuckle to purchase the Vernon Tigers as well. Okay, so Arbuckle assumed ownership, controlling ownership of the team and presidency of the club, with Anger being co-owner and a board director. With the Vernon Tigers, Anger saw an opportunity to take the baseball club to new heights, drawing in spectacular crowds to the small industrial town out there. The city of Vernon is about an hour away from Hollywood. It grew to infamy by being home to Doyle's Bar, where it was known as the world's longest bar, with a 100-foot long bar, 37 cash registers, and as many bartenders, of course. Holes were drilled into the ceiling where security can watch rowdy patrons as they left the fight or left the baseball game. Oh, another really interesting point about the Vernon Tigers and the world's longest bar is that they positioned the bar right at the end of left field. So as the teams kind of went into a different inning, they can hit the bar and then come back and continue playing. And the city of Vernon, although it was a very low population, basically a place where it was a place where you slaughter animals, basically farmland. It was one of two wet towns still in Southern California. By 1919, the other town being Venice, California. So Venice, California and Vernon, California were the only two wet towns there where they served alcohol, and you bet your bottom dollar that's where baseball players were. And it was such a popular thing to basically live where the wet town was that when the Vernon Tigers were sold, they were sold to Venice. So they moved from Vernon to Venice, continued drinking, and then they came back to the city of Vernon. Incredible. Coincidence? Not. And it was common for players to go for a drink between innings. Arbuckle took on the ownership of the team and entertained folks out there with Keaton. All kinds of hijinks grew out of that. Obviously, people were bussed in from Hollywood. As they wanted to be part of the ambiance of that. They routinely played games nearby fields with cast and crew members between filming too. So if they were filming out there, they would also go out to Doyle's Park. And Buster Keaton absolutely loved baseball. He said, "As far back as I can remember, baseball has been my favorite sport. I started playing the game as soon as I was old enough to handle a glove. A sandlot where baseball was being played was the first thing I looked for whenever the three Keatons played in our new town." And that was his dad and his mother as well. And Buster's quote stated in his biography, so Buster would play shortstop on any team that he was on, starting with the summers between 1908 and 1916 in the neighborhood of Muskegon, Michigan, along with other famous vaudevillians there too. So the Vernon Tigers were a really wild team, of course. I mean, they were right next to a bar and they had Byron. What can we do? Houck struck out 7 batters in 3 innings on his very first outing there. But then there was a bit of a problem on October 11, 1919, in a very wild game. There was an umpire who examined a ball that Byron threw, and he threw it out. It irked him, but nothing happened until a riot ensued when the umpire called a runner out on the first inning when he called a runner out on first base in the 6th inning. The managers and players swarmed the field. They got into a rumble there, hammering on the umpire. When I searched for this particular image, this is what it gave me. I'm not sure if this is the exact image from the time, but it's an example. and the Vernon Tigers being a sort of a temporary investment for Arbuckle, the movie star quickly sold his interest on the Rowdy team. It was on December 1919 that Houck announced again that he may quit the national pastime altogether. Where are we on that? Number 4, 5, something like that? He spent the winter in Hollywood with his wife, and he lined up a job for himself as a cameraman at one of the motion picture studios in Los Angeles. Oh, gee, I wonder which one it could have been. Well, it was Andrews. More likely it was Fatty Arbuckle's. And there, under Keaton's direction, they basically take apart cameras, they learn the inner workings of them, and they put them back together, almost like a soldier, taking apart the rifle and then putting it back together. Sometimes even in the dark, so you know exactly what you're doing with the tool. So in March 1920, Houck notified the Tigers that he would like to continue turning the motion picture camera instead of playing baseball. He announced his retirement yet again. But in late April, he changed his mind, giving a leave of absence out from the motion picture business to rejoin the Tigers again. But something happened, of course, because by October 1920, there were surprising allegations that hit national headlines, where subpoenas were suddenly issued to management and players of the Vernon Tigers, including Houck, to testify in a coastal scandal where Babe Horton, the former first baseman of the team, was charged with attempting to buy games by bribing players $1,700, around $30,000 today, to throw games. He said, I didn't do that. I only offered them $500. So he was charged. And this was the reason which allowed Vernon to win the pennant in 1919. I mean, those were the charges that Barton was saying. Those are the reasons. We cheated our way. And he also alleged that the money came from a slush fund which came from Sure Thing Gambling. Okay? There's a lot of gambling there going on. Imagine a huge bar, lots of games where you can just gamble on. Crazy. And so he threw Byron under the bus, including, so he made him appear as a witness in this case, saying that he was there at a meeting with Lou Anger present, but it was a difficult thing to ignore at the time. It was also during the time when the Chicago White Sox were also implicated in controversy involving game fixing, in which 8 players were indicted, throwing the 1919 World Series against the Cincinnati Reds for cash, okay, and getting the money from a gambling ring as well. It was famously known as the Black Sox scandal. So if you're familiar with the Black Sox scandal, there it is. Shoeless Joe Jackson. If you build it, they will come. That's the guy. It was another low moment there in Byron's career. But he would resurface again in January 1921. He would resign from baseball again, retiring in April 1921 to operate a movie camera, only to change his mind again and rejoin the Tigers that year. And then again later the Beavers in July. So as much as we wanted to quit baseball, we really couldn't. Okay, we're getting, let's skip a little bit. Let's go there, okay? Here we go. Shortly after joining the Beavers in Portland, Houck received a telegram from his wife in 1922, who was still living in Hollywood towards the end. There, he departed back to Los Angeles in August. He announced his retirement from making films to stay with the Tigers in Vernon. And after a battle with encephalitis, Byron's wife, Kitty, passed away in March 1923. He suffered a heart blow there, unfortunately. That is what happened in his life. He lost his young wife. Or was she young? Because you'll notice that, you can't notice here because this is a very small type, but it says on her death record that she was a year older, but when you go back into the record, she was actually 3 years older than Byron. Somehow. Okay, let's get to the good stuff here. So here we go, in 1924, is that where we are? Yeah, 1924, in theaters across America, Houck was billed as a cameraman for Sherlock Jr. that was released in May 1924, the early Buster Keaton feature. Would go on to be regarded as a pioneering film for special effects and camera tricks. We showed it last year for the Cottage Grove Historical Society Buster Keaton Film Night, which happens to be October 21st, next Saturday. But we showed Sherlock Jr. last year, and that was really wonderful. It was before I realized Byron was even part of the whole game. So it's a really exciting thing to learn that he was a cameraman there, because Keaton later said that every cameraman in the business went to see that picture more than once, trying to figure out how the hell we did some of that. Keaton hired Houck as a camera operator for Innovative Movie, recognizing that the former pitcher gathered enough experience with the motion picture camera task to task him as photographer for the future. In 2005, Time magazine listed Sherlock Jr. as one of the all-time 100 movies, by the way. One of his best ones. One of the greatest ones of all time, really. And Houck would go on to help Keaton film and photograph his next two feature films, The Navigator and Seven Chances, and then joined Fatty Arbuckle's production company to photograph a few short films there after Fatty Buckle's notorious scandal in 1925. Where are we here? Yeah, here we go. Let's get to this. All right. So this is a picture that kind of started it all for me. This is a picture that I saw in the Sentinel as I was looking for the K&D stuff, and I had never seen this picture before. When you go through a whole bunch of the pictures from the archive, or even just on Google, you sort of familiarize yourself with a template of what you've seen. And I'd never seen this person before, so it's kind of struck me as curious as to why he was featured there. And when I look over to the left, there is an article written about him. And so before we go on that, we'll go into 1926, and Byron, who had been working with Keaton on his two feature films after his wife Katie passed away, came on as a still photographer for the General. He was sort of taking the backseat to two new cinematographers there too. He still continued making films as a cinematographer, but for Fatty Arbuckle. Right, okay, so Byron, you rejoined Buster's crew in 1926 as Keaton was gearing up to shoot the Civil War comedy that brought him and his entire film crew, including Houck, to the little town of Cottage Grove near the university where Houck once pitched. Okay, it would prove to be a good stand-in for the set of Marietta, Georgia, and Kelly Field, a good place to play baseball during the film's downtime. June 7th, 1926, Byron Houck pitches a game at Kelly Field, just a quarter mile away from here. Okay? Hollywood Stars beats A&M. That is the title of or that's the headline of the article. It's reported by the Cottage Grove Sentinel on June 7th. Keaton's Hollywood Stars defeated the Anderson and Middleton team in a game that afternoon. The score being 14-3, the local A&M team took the lead in the early part of the game, but Buster rallied his men, and they took the lead that the opposition could not overcome, 15-5. He was employing baseball stars. He brought baseball stars with him, and that's why they won. They won because they had really great players on their team. Ringers. I know, it was fixed. But Houck, the photographer of the Hollywood team, on the very first inning, Charlie horses his leg with, Charlie horses the muscle on one of his legs in the first inning, trying to beat the ball to the sack. He stayed in the game, and then Buster continued running the sacks for him. So that's kind of a little interesting footnote. Now we have him out there playing the game, but he injures himself right away. Yeah, it happens a lot. There's some other stories where Byron Houck, he's getting ready to start the game, and he's coming out of the dugout, he falls and trips and rolls over. And most likely he was drinking during the game. That's why some of the losses came out of loss due to drinking. Ah, yes. Okay, and so here's another really interesting footnote, okay? So, June 1926, just a couple of months after Byron and his crew get here, Mr. and Miss George Houck, okay? They come back to Cottage Grove to visit with S.L. Mackin. They start coming here every year to visit with him. In likelihood, because also his brother is nearby and visiting with him too. Mr. Houck is the brother of Byron, cameraman for Keaton. And even the Eugene Guard tries to get a little taste of Hollywood too by putting in their 2 cents about why movies begin with so many titles. Why do we need so many titles? The Eugene Guard states, because all the silent films need to have credits on the front end. They were peeved by that. And the Sentinel kind of trolled them on that. But here it says that, oh, yes. Okay, so if you get a moment to come to the Sentinel at some point and you want to look through some of the archives, ask to see the July 1st, 1926 edition, because there is where we have a really interesting article written by most likely L. Boothby. But in there, it's a really fascinating interview only with Buster Keaton. And Buster tells about the important features that cameramen have in picture filming. And their job is the subject of the article, which is a really cool thing. Because you get to know some of the ins and outs of what he's thinking, why he's using some of them, and the equipment as well. Okay, let's wrap it up here pretty soon. So here's a very famous picture of the cowcatcher there, Keaton on the front. The other one is them in the same position too. This is one of the most iconic images that we have from the film. We used it for the beautiful mural here that we have on 99 in Maine. But it's also one of the most important images in cinema history. When the General was first released, people didn't really know what to think of it. And as it continued growing in the hearts and minds of people, in culture in general, and some of the cinema scholars have looked back on it and have placed it very high on their best of lists. And it continues to grow every 10 years. Like the UK magazine Sight and Sound and Time Magazine and others, go back and they take a look. They do a little refresher. Is Citizen Kane still the best movie? Kind of a thing, okay? And so that one kind of drops a little bit. But as we see the General, it just continues to go higher and higher and higher on some of these lists. And it came out of little old Cottage Grove here. Ah, yes. And so the film was shot between May and then July. And in July, or right around the end of July, there was a lot of smoke here in Cottage Grove. So the crew went back to Los Angeles and then came back here in August 1926, and he brought Byron back with him too, and a whole bunch of the crew as well, to finish some of the filming that was taking place here in Cottage Grove. Yeah, so they were compelled to complete this picture, and it was basically Byron Houck's last feature film. He continued making some short films. He also continued acting as well. So a lot of the professionals in the movie, especially the ones where Buster Keaton was playing in, some of those people were professional baseball players. And so now I'm going back to some of the archives to look at some of the people he chose to be in his film work and seeing if those were old baseball stars, so then I can take a look at who those people were as well. Let's go to our next slide here. We're basically wrapping it up. Okay, so by 1928, 1929, we see that S.L. Mackin keeps returning to Cottage Grove. Okay. Oh, and this is the whole reason why I brought up George Houck to begin with, and S.L. Mackin and Byron. So when we look back in history and we think, well, who brought Buster out here and the entire crew? It's a very high likelihood that it was Byron who put a little note in his ear to maybe take a look at Oregon to try to film out here. So now we're a little bit closer. We can't say for sure that that's how it all worked out because he did send scouts out here, but the likelihood is that Byron, who was participating in that film studio, suggested going to Cottage Grove to scout because he was out here too. So so after he leaves Hollywood, we don't really hear very much from Byron. There's kind of a blank until 1931. And in 1931, oh yes, in 1931, articles start to appear about some of the famous stars who have become baseball players, or vice versa, some of the baseball players who are not becoming movie stars. And so his name was still being trickled out there, but it wasn't until 1937 that his name kind of comes up again, but in a patent. Houck becomes an inventor in 1937, and he invents a comminated box and is given a patent in 1937. The box it's basically an airtight box, and it's very small, and it's still cited by other inventors of patents much later. I put up a little list here of some of the people, like the Eastman Kodak Company, they cited it. Estee Lauder, for some of their compacts, they cited it too. And some of the more current sightings are from as late as 2014. So they're still looking at Byron's invention and taking notes. Then in the 1940s, Byron goes and works as a salesman for a company called Flintcoat. Flintcoat Company made asbestos roofing materials from the 1930s until the 1980s, until asbestos litigation caused Flintcoat to file for bankruptcy in 2004. He helped make packing cardboard boxes and materials for the Flintcoat Company as well. By 1946, Lou Anger had passed away. Sort of an end of an era there for everybody. He left a lot of amazing details in cinema history, not only as an actor, but then much later too. He was owner of United Artists as well. Still going. I believe Tom Cruise owns that now. But it wasn't until, here we go, 1950s. I wish I could show you this a little bit bigger because that's really where it's at. When I go to reprint this stuff for the next edition, by the way, because there is still a part 3 to this story, there's going to be a lot of good information in some of these pictures. I know it's really tiny small, really small. But the August 1956 Sentinel edition reproduces an article. Hang on a second. This is what we're talking about. Okay, so as I discovered that Byron had moved to Dorina in about 1950, he retired out here. He decided to come back to Cottage Grove. Most likely he had a fondness for it, like a lot of us who come back to it wanting to live here. That's kind of how it works. You see it the first time and then you want to figure out how you can live here. Well, Byron did it in 1950. He came out here and he bought a house over near Rat Creek in Dorina. And as he was living here, he was very involved with a lot of folks in town. He got involved with the building of the Western Oregon Exposition buildings. And I discovered that, but I found that in 2016, the Sentinel had republished an old paper article about the WOE. And in there, it states that 2 buildings were completed at the fairgrounds that included 2 animal sheds, 12 by 50, and the other is 14 by 80. Charming of the building committee. He was chairman of the building committee, and he was also charming. But he was definitely the chairman of the building committee and a volunteer of many hours of labor at the grounds. Byron Houck. He directed the construction of the fair buildings from that summer on. 1956, they were completed. And he had assistance from, I think, 3 or 4 other older residents here. And the very last push was basically a call for other residents to come and help with some of the heavy labor. And they got it, and they opened it just in time. So I think it would be really cool to see a mural for Byron Houck over at one of these buildings. We definitely owe it to him. We owe it to him to remember him. And that he helped bring in these incredible structures to Cottage Grove, where over the last, 90 years now? 80 years? They're still there. And they work very, very well. Okay, here we go. Here's the June 18th, 1969, Santa Cruz, California. So apparently Byron Houck lived here until about 1956, 1957. So after he completed the project at the WOE, he moved to Santa Cruz, near Santa Cruz, and he lived there for the rest of his life. About 10 years. And he lived there with his wife, Rose. He was remarried sometime in 1940 and lived there with her. And he passed away June 1969. But interestingly, in the Santa Cruz Sentinel, his obituary read that former A's player dies, Byron Houck, a member of the Philadelphia A's, who won the A's 1913 World Series. He died Tuesday at the local hospital. He was 77. He was a native of Minnesota, and he was a retired salesman for the Flint Cove Company. And he was a past member of the so-called Grange. That's it. We don't remember in his obituary that he made some of the most inventive movies in cinema history, or one of the crankiest baseball players ever. Okay, but we do remember that he was a master at the so-called Grange. And so his services were held there in Santa Cruz. But he was cremated, and his ashes, his interment, was at the Rosedale Cemetery in Los Angeles. And so that is where his final resting place is. He was a resident there in Santa Cruz for 13 years. And so finally here, folks, Houck at this moment now is, we're trying to remember him. Remember him as the number 5 all-time baseball player at the U of O. His memory continues, hopefully through the Sentinel articles. He goes up a little bit further on the rank here. He's definitely a better player at the U of O than he was later in the majors. And if you want to read more about him too, there's a really interesting chapter in the book called Buster Keaton's Crew by Lissel Foote, and they have an interesting footnoted article on there about Buster 2 for everybody to read. In case anybody wants to know more, feel free to let me know that you want one of the articles that we published so far in the Sentinel, and I'll get those out to you. We have 2 of them so far, and like I said, a 3rd one coming up, I believe, next week. I wanted to wait for this program, and then, because if I tell you everything, you're not going to want to. But, yeah, I'll be able to do that for you next week. You can have something to chew on. Let me see, do we have anything else? No, that's it. Oh.